Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our 43rd Ward and 44th Ward Public Safety Forum, specific to vehicular hijacking. My name is McKay Murphy, and I work for Alderman Smith's office in the 43rd Ward. And I just want to walk through quickly some Zoom technicalities that you may already be aware of. First of all, this is a Zoom webinar, so if you're signed in as an attendee, which means we will not be able to see or hear you. However, you can still ask your questions as the presentations go along using the question and answer feature down at the bottom of your screen. And you can send those. We will do our best to keep up with them and answer as many as we can. If you are having technical issues, or somebody that you know, a neighbor is having technical issues signing on to this Zoom, we also encourage you to go to our Facebook page, Alderman Michelle Smith, 43rd Ward, and we're live streaming it there for your convenience with that. With that, if you have any other technical questions, please submit them to the question and answer function. I'm going to turn it over to Alderman Smith, who's going to open our program tonight.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our forum. We're really glad that you've come to join Alderman Tunney and myself to discuss this very serious issue. I want to just quickly talk about why we decided to have this forum tonight. Crime sometimes goes in ebbs and flows in our community, and sometimes it usually requires a coordinated effort to combat those flows. This carjacking surge is one of these times when we all need to work together to combat a relatively new and frightening crime. As you will learn later today, carjackings have more than doubled in our communities. And this is a citywide issue, not just one in our ward. But we wanted to talk, of course, today about the issues that particularly impact us as neighbors and friends and businesses and car owners and passengers in our community. That's why I'm so glad that Alderman Tunney is here, who is going to talk a little bit about who will be presenting tonight, who will be present in our agenda. First, today, after these introductions, and after Alderman Tunney just tells you who the panelists are going to be, each of our panelists will spend a few minutes giving you the information that you need right now to talk about carjackings. That will be followed by an extensive question and answer period. And as McKay said, if you look at that Q&A function, you can write down your question. And if we can't answer it online, there's a couple of technical questions I can see. And as you look at the questions that are already being populated on the question and answer thing, if you agree with that question, if you think that's a good question, give it a thumbs up, because that promotes it up the chain, so that the question that has 20 thumbs ups, 20 likes, that'll be asked first. So this is a way we can make sure that the concerns that you face, the most of you face at once, will be answered immediately. So with that, I'd like to introduce my colleague and my neighbor, Alderman Tom Tunney, who'll talk about the panelists.
Thank you, Alderman. Again, my name is Alderman Tom Tunney of the 44th Ward, and I echo the comments of Alderman Michelle Smith about public safety and the carjacking phenomena that has impacted our communities over the last year or more. The data will show that while overall crime is relatively lower in 2020, the carjacking phenomena has gone out of control, which you know, because you live and breathe it every day in our communities. With that being said, I know the mayor has added different strategies on the carjacking phenomena, adding more resources and diverting some of the detective work, which Chief of Detectives Deenihan will talk about, to provide some quick response to this pandemic. And I don't mean COVID, I mean this is the carjacking. We also have representatives from the state's attorney's office, because this is a team approach. It's the police, it's the community, it's the state's attorney's office and the court system. So we're going to talk a little bit about everything, and hopefully you will ask us lots of good questions. I want to reiterate that we're going to start with the Chief of Detectives, Brendan Deenihan. Actually, we're going to ask our state senator, Sarah Feigenholz, to say a few words to kick it off. But we're going to have the Chief of Detectives, Deenihan, speak first, followed by the Commander, Jill Stevens, in the 18th District, Commander Chris, I still can't get it right, Papiano, I think, from our 19th District, and then from the Chief of Juvenile Justice Bureau, Miriam Ahmad, and also Chief of Criminal Prosecutions for the State's Attorney's Office, Natasha Toller. So we've got lots of resources here, but you know, we are elected officials to be able to listen and not just dictate how this program is going. So I know there's going to be lots of questions in the chat session. You know, Alderman Smith and I and the people on the panel are determined to try to give you the best and up-to-date information in how we can combat this surge in carjackings. So with that, I'm going to move it on to, I think our state senator, Sarah Feigenholz, is going to speak next. Sarah?
Thank you, Alderman Tunney. I am Senator Sarah Feigenholz, and I am so thrilled that Alderman Smith and Tunney invited me here for this event. They both keep me on my toes all the time. And I want to especially thank Commander Stevens, Chris Papian, and Detective Brendan Deenihan, and all of our law enforcement who spend their days trying to keep us safe. And I too am very concerned about the alarming rise in carjackings, the nature of them, and I think we're all here because we know there is nothing more important than keeping our constituents and our neighbors safe. I know, as Tom said, that the mayor has committed 40 additional law enforcement officers to combat this problem, to sort of reassemble a task force that was once working on this issue of carjacking. But doing the deep dive in the data is going to be, and listening to experts from law enforcement and the state's attorney's office and DJJ, is going to really help us fine tune what we need to do as a community to move forward and solve this problem together as a community. So again, I look forward to this, and thanks for inviting me.
Well, thank you so much, State Senator Sarah Feigenholz. Just before we set the stage here, I'm going to throw a few statistics up here. And what is, and now these are the major offenses that we asked the police to give us for each ward, as opposed to just by police beat. And it's really, we will put these out in our newsletter, so you don't need to memorize them now or anything. We'll do that in our next newsletter. But I think the key thing that you can see here is the second and third line are the hijacking numbers. Aggravated means that a gun or a weapon is used. Vehicular hijacking is done without an observed weapon. And you can see that the number of carjackings have been pretty modest. In 19, we had 7, that's 4 and 3 together. In 2020, we had 15, and most of those occurred toward the end of the year. Since December, our community has had 10. So this is something that is happening right now and is alarming to everyone. The other crime here that has gone up is motor vehicle theft, which is kind of a category of that, which I'm sure our police friends will talk about. The other kinds of crime that do occur in our community have gone down. And you can see that, and I think that's in part because of the pandemic itself and also the real good police focus that we've had on this. So that's where we are in the 43rd Ward. Tom, you want to quickly show them the 44th Ward? Next slide. Tom?
Okay, Michelle, and thanks. These are the stats from 16 through 20, and it dovetails a little bit with what Alderman Smith was saying, that we had little or no on the hijacking part. It seems, I'm looking at this, let me double check here, the vehicular hijacking and aggravated. In 19, we basically had 2 and 0, and up in 2020, we're up to 13. So they're both as serious, and that's obviously one of the reasons we have our forum. The other one, as Michelle Smith had talked about, is motor vehicle theft. And while we had about 100 in 2019, we're up to 170. So this issue is first and foremost on the minds of our constituents. Some of our other serious categories have seen a decrease, but a lot of that is in some respect, at least in 44, based on the fact that there's just a lot of less people in and around our neighborhood at night and our entertainment districts. So that being said, this is first and foremost on our minds. And, you know, I don't want to minimize the fact that total crime incidents in 2020 were down 32%. But that's still because the whole world has changed in 2020. So we can't really compare this on a year-over-year basis. But the focus of tonight is specific on carjacking and the city's response to it. And both in 43 and 44, these are, 500% increase.
Yes.
Exactly.
We
got
were
a serious
able to
problem.
get, thank you, Alderman. And we were able to get up to the minute statistics, thanks to the city's database, showing that in January, we've had 3 in our neck of the woods and 1 in 44. So so we had 7 since December in 43, and 3 in 2021. And Alderman Tunney's had 1 more. And with that, just to set the stage so we know how big the problem is in our community, I think now we would like to introduce Chief of Detectives Brendan Deenihan.
Right.
Thank you, Chief.
And I was going to introduce the Chief Deenihan, which I will, but
Sorry.
I do want to say for the number of people on the call is that whether it's Alderman Michelle Smith or Tom Tunney or Scott Wagasback or James Kappelman, we are in this together. So as the people on the call, we don't have arbitrary lines on diversity north and diversity south or west of Racine. We are all in this together, working with our police commanders on trying to keep our north side safe. And that's why you employ us, and that's why we hope to ensure your trust that this is a team effort working with police, state's attorney, and our offices. So and our state partners there, because a lot of this is all connected. And I don't want to minimize the fact and compartmentalize this issue, because we're all in this together. So with that, as Michelle Smith has said, our Chief of Detectives, Brendan Deenihan, oversees the new carjacking task forces that are focusing on obviously the rise in carjackings all across the city. He'll be sharing tips on how to prevent carjackings, share more information about these task force, and answer questions towards the end. And I've had this conversation with my colleagues and with our Chief of Detectives. The technology has made it so easy to leave your keys in the car and your fob in the car. And some of this is just common sense. But, I want the chief to talk about preventive strategies and realize how vulnerable we are, whether it's at the gas station or whether it's, warming the car up on the street and I'm still in the house. There are definitely some safety concerns that I'm sure he'll address. Chief, you want to take it away?
Sure. So first off, thanks for having us. I know there's a lot of people on the call, so I want to thank the Alderman for inviting myself and the other constituents. We appreciate being here and sharing the information. So I know both aldermen mentioned they already gave the up-to-date numbers, and I'm going to briefly go through some slides that I presented to the aldermanic hearing, which was about 2 weeks ago. And I know a lot of people have questions, so I'm going to get through the data. There's a few other individuals who are going to speak, but I know a lot of people have questions, so we can actually get to the questions, and I can answer some of people's concerns. So we did have a meeting on this with all the aldermen back on the 22nd of January. And one thing that everybody should know on the call is that it's not just Chicago. I know everyone should be concerned about Chicago, and that's what we're talking about. But just from a bigger perspective, for example, Minneapolis has seen a 537% increase in carjackings. New York is up over 100%. New Orleans is up over 100%. So it's a nationwide problem that's occurring. It's not just Chicago, but obviously we're mostly concerned with Chicago and then specifically your wards. So this slide shows the massive increase in carjackings. If you're looking at this, this is 2016 through 2020. And you can see in April when the COVID-19 hit and the stay-at-home order was enacted, you could see this unbelievable increase in carjackings. We had a slight dip when e-learning began, but that didn't last long, and it continued to spike throughout the entire year in 2020. And then unfortunately in 2021, we're still dealing with the same issues. This is just a heat map for the districts. You see the large clusters on the south and west sides, but specifically, I know we're talking about wards, but in the police, we have the districts. It's really the 18th district and the 19th district, and it gives you your basic numbers of how many carjackings occurred in 2020. This is for 2021, and I know the alderman already went over the current numbers on how high they are. These numbers, like I said, are from a couple weeks ago, so you have to excuse me. I wasn't able to update this presentation, but we just went over the current numbers for the ward up to date, up until yesterday. This is a list of arrests, and eventually Chief Ahmad from the juvenile justice system and Chief Tyler from the adult system will talk a little bit about how the court system works. But you can see the cluster of people we're arresting are between 15 and 20 years of age. So anybody under 18 is a juvenile, and 18 over are the adults. So they go to those separate court systems. And you can see up on the top, the arrest for vehicular hijacking, for aggravated vehicular hijacking. And last, you can see that arrest for criminal trespass to vehicle. And the reason the arrest for criminal trespass to vehicle is so high, you see those arrests in the thousands, is that is a misdemeanor charge. And so what'll happen is, unfortunately, if somebody is carjacked and somebody takes the car and officers are able to arrest individuals in the car, maybe the next day or even a week later, we are able to arrest those individuals in the car. But as people know, and you have seen on TV just from some of the videos we put out, this happens so fast when someone runs up to you and they have a hoodie on and a mask and they stick a gun in your face and take your car within less than 5 seconds. It's very difficult for victims to make an identification. And many times there's many hurdles in the criminal justice system to charge them with the highest felony. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on that because we are using technology to build stronger cases so we can work with the court system to charge the offenders with the highest charge possible. But many times you will see that criminal trespass to vehicle charge sometimes is the highest charge that we can come up with. And that's why those numbers are so large. More importantly, I think people on the call want to know what strategies we are doing and what we're trying to do to combat this huge uptick in the carjackings. So we're taking a comprehensive approach, as both the aldermen have already spoke about, and it's really a team approach, and it's even a team of teams. So obviously we're law enforcement, but we're working extremely closely with the prosecution unit and to make sure we build the best cases possible. And since the task force has been up and running, we've had some great success with Chief Ahmad and Chief Tyler, making sure that the detectives have built the best cases possible, like I said, to secure the highest felony charge, so then the state's attorneys then can do their job in court. And I'll let the state's attorneys talk about this a little bit further, but I want everybody to understand that the court system is also, barely operating. We're not having jury trials yet because we're not having juries obviously coming to the courthouses. So the courthouses are also operating at minimal standards at this time. what we're trying to do is public engagement. I guess that's what we're doing tonight, is getting out the information. But from the law enforcement side, we have all kinds of different public engagement projects that we're working on. And then to actually stop this, we have several different projects with youth intervention, trying to get to these kids who are obviously just doing it as copycat crimes. I won't go through all the strategies here, but the slides, they were available for the aldermanic hearing. I can make them available to both the aldermen after this as well. But it just shows how we're all working together. And from the law enforcement side, I do want to say that, the mayor and the superintendent had mentioned that we added additional resources, sergeants and patrol officers to the detective division to help combat this, about 40 individuals. But it's not the 40 bodies. It's really more of a total team effort. And I think commanders on the call will explain that it's not just the detectives doing it. It's every officer out there. So the detectives are going to roll calls. Each of these districts have SDSC rooms. They use technologies. So when a carjacking call comes out, the beat officers know what to do. The detectives know what to do. The SDSC rooms know what to do. And it's everybody working together to try to, first of all, prevent the problem, but secondarily to solve it. So it's everyone working. It's not just an additional 40 bodies. It's really a true team of the entire police department who's sharing information to arrest these offenders and to hold them accountable. And I know that I won't get into a lot of the youth intervention. There's certain things that the police department is doing, but there's also many other resources that are coming out of the mayor's office and city hall that are specifically working with individuals and making sure that they get the right individuals into programs to prevent them from committing this crime. While I know everyone on the call understands the mayor's working with the teachers to try to open up the schools. This is the next slide is just a little bit about what I already spoke about. It's just some of the preventative actions we're taking, our responses, and how the investigations, how we're using data and we're analyzing all the information. We're working with our federal partners as well to make sure we have the appropriate response. And as I mentioned and I'll let the prosecutors talk about this, but the police department has been in contact, obviously, with the state's attorney's office, our federal partners. Chief Ahmad is from the juvenile system, and they're also working with the chief judges, Evans and Tuman, to do everything that we can to solve this problem. So it's a true team efforts. And like I said, we have had some successes the last couple of weeks with arresting some offenders and removing them from the streets. And some of those offenders were part of crews and part of patterns that the detectives have developed. So just in the last week, we took down a couple patterns because we were able to charge some individuals with multiple cases. So those are some of the things that we're doing. I know people are going to have a lot of questions. So I'd like to turn it over to our next speaker. Alderman Smith will let us know who the next speaker is. And then I'm going to stick around to answer questions. And as Alderman Tunney mentioned, also to give some tips on what not to do and what we're seeing out there regarding patterns and how to keep yourself safe. So I'll wait for some questions and I'll be able to answer those. Thanks, Alderman.
Thank you, Chief. There was a lot of detail in that presentation. I know people have a lot of questions about it. Our next speaker is Commander of the 18th District, Jill Stevens. Commander, welcome and thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Alderman Smith and Alderman Tunney and Chief Deenihan for hosting this for everyone. So as the Chief mentioned, our districts are a little different than wards. So the 18th district starts at Fullerton on the north end and it goes south to the river. And on the west end, it's the river and it goes east to the lake. So I can report on some crime stats on our district. So as Alderman Tunney mentioned, overall crime stats are down and ours are down 37%. And these overall index crimes include robberies, aggravates, burglaries, and thefts. Our motor vehicle thefts are up, and as we know, our carjackings are up. So I took a look at our carjackings from the first of the year to now, and district-wide, we've had 6 hijackings and 1 attempt. And of those 6, 2 of them were in Old Town, and the other one was from the Gold Coast. So we did have a few of those carjackings up in my 10 sector, which is your ward up on the north end. So we've been working, like the Chief said, not only with the detectives, but with other units to help us assist with some strategies. So what we do in the 18th district is we utilize a lot of high visibility missions, particularly in our areas of crime. So we're having our SDSC rooms every week. They sit down and they look at where the crime data is taking place, and they look at these locations, and that's where we deploy our personnel. So we look at where our crime is happening. We deploy our TAC teams there, our additional rapid cars there, our wagons there. And that's where we use, when they're not answering calls, that's where we put our police officers. And the Gold Coast and Lincoln Park is part of that deployment area on different parts of my district. So we do traffic missions, we do robbery missions, we do carjacking missions, and we do motor vehicle theft missions. And when TAC's not doing that, those missions, they're very involved in community now. So several times a week, our TAC officers are doing community outreach so that the community gets to learn who are these TAC officers who are out there. So another one we just recently did up in the DePaul area, we did a walk and talk with DePaul and the DePaul community. And then in the Gold Coast area, we did some flyering. So we flyered carjacking flyers. TAC went out there and started flyering the Gold Coast community. So TAC's not only being deployed in high visibility missions, they're also on foot, walking the beats and talking to the community members. As I'm sure you know, we're part of Central Control Group 18-1, and that's part of CERT. So we get additional assets from the critical incident response teams. So when those teams are not assigned to protests, they're deployed in the 18th and the 1st District, helping us combat crime. So that's another resource that we have in 18. And then I'm sure some of you might have been on it, but on the 23rd of January, our CAPS office, Sergeant Shanks behind me, he hosted a vehicular hijacking seminar. And I believe there was over 300 participants in that seminar. And the sergeant from the detective division was a guest speaker, so they did it together. So that's an example of us working with the detectives. I meet weekly with the detectives from the area, and they come to my CompStat briefings and they present updates to us so that we're all on the same page. I also work closely, obviously, with the commander of the 19th district, because the only thing that separates us is Fullerton Avenue. So crime passes from one side to the other. So the commander and I work very closely together. So these are just some tools that we do. We talked about CAPS multiple times, and our strategic deployment plan is Gold Coast is part of our plan, our yearly plan with that. So that's another tool that we have. So with that, I'll give it back to the Alderman. Thank you.
Thank you, Commander. So now this is Alderman Tunney again, and we're going to introduce the commander of the 19th District, Chris Papiani. Chris, just say Commander Chris. We all know him as Commander Chris. All right.
That is perfect.
And then you can identify our boundaries as the commander in 18 says. You know, it's all pretty fluid, as you well know. So
absolutely. Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me here. It's definitely appreciated, and this information definitely needs to get out. To introduce myself one more time, I'm the commander of the 19th District, and our boundaries run from south at Fullerton all the way to Lawrence to the north, from the lake east to the river west. And we border the 18th District. So like Commander Stevens said, we work very closely together, especially in combating crimes that are crossing the borders and going from district to district. So overall, I believe, you know, when we're talking about crime in the 19th District, our crime is down overall, with the exception of motor vehicle thefts and vehicular hijackings. With those in and of itself, that is our main focus right now. And with these motor vehicle thefts that we've been having in the district, we're looking at, as an overall motor vehicle thefts, about 58% of the total motor vehicle thefts are for unattended vehicles. And with that, we develop different strategies in order to identify and notify individuals that are leaving their cars running in for food, delivery drivers, you know, up to the point where we were actually ticketing cars just to let them know that they're going to get their car stolen if, in fact, they're just leaving their cars with the keys running. Late last year, we realized that we started seeing a big spike in these vehicular hijacking. So to Chief Deenihan's credit, we developed a strategy and we asked him about it, and immediately he jumped jumped on, looked at our statistics, looked at what was going on, looked at the numbers and all the data, and he developed this motor vehicle hijacking team, and which assisted us in a lot of the enhanced our ability to track and look into these carjackings that were happening. Right. Along with that, we used our SDSC room, our strategic decision support center, to look at where these crimes were occurring, these vehicle hijackings were occurring. And what we did is we would track them. And immediately we had a system in place where we would send vehicles to Lakeshore Drive. We would notify other SDSC rooms in the 18th district and the 20th district to anticipate where these individuals would be going. And then from there, we would track where the car was taken from, where the car ended up, and look at the time and dates where they were happening, and then deploy missions in those areas. Right. The issue that we're having citywide with all of these carjackings is that they're happening all the time, different hours. So using the data, analyzing it with our analysts, using our SDSC rooms, we were able to get into areas where we believe that these hijackers would be. And I believe that's what limited the number of carjackings in our district. This isn't just a city crime, just like the chief, crimes that are occurring in the city, just like the chief mentioned earlier, but we're also in communication with all our outlying suburbs and the different areas, the detectives in the areas that are assisting us and letting us know where these cars are coming up. And that's helping us identify where these individuals are, where they could potentially go. And we're using that data to anticipate their movement. But overall, I believe our crime is going down, and I believe with the community partnerships that we're having with the Alderman's office, with all of our partners, community partners, we're trying to get the message out to make people more aware of what's happening and try to use the data to anticipate where these crimes are going to be committed and try to catch these individuals during the crime as they're committing it and prosecute them as we see fit. So thank you so much. And we'll be answering questions in a little bit.
Yeah. Commander, before you exit, I forgot to mention in my opening remarks that we've been working very closely with Cook County Commissioner Bridget Gaynor on adding more license plate readers onto Lakeshore Drive. Originally, it was the idea of motorcycles on Lakeshore Drive and the issues that they present. But with the additional license plate readers, I think this will augment the offenders on the carjacking in and around Lakeshore Drive. So I just wanted to bring that to the attention to the audience. Thank you.
And thank you so much for that. With your support and Alderman Smith's support, we were able to put in these requests because in many of the cases, a lot of our offenders are getting onto Lakeshore Drive and they're going into different districts. So having these plate readers allow us to get that information out much faster, know exactly where they're going, and again, using the data, anticipate where they're going to end up and have teams ready to intercept these individuals. So thank you so much for that.
And thank you, Commander Papiano. It really is, a couple of the cases that we've had in our area in the 19th district really highlight what a citywide problem is. Some of you may know that we had a carjacking in December in which a car was taken, and that car ended up being used by the same offender in a tragic carjacking in Bridgeport. And
yeah, we were a couple blocks away from that one. We used the data to kind of look at where it was, and we were a couple, but like, again, the chief said, these happen in seconds. So when the call came out, we were literally 2 blocks away and we tried to get the information. The good thing about this one was where the Alderman is talking about, most of the houses on the block had video. So we were able to get video from some of the neighbors and use that to find out who these individuals were. So I apologize for interrupting you, but thank you. Yeah,
that was great. That was great. So thank you very much, Commander Papiano. Just to tee up our next speaker, I'd like to ask Chief Deenihan to come back on and to show the slide about the arrests. We're about to hear from our colleagues at the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. And I just wanted to talk to Chief Deenihan briefly about that handoff. In other words, they work a case, people are arrested, You indicated earlier in your conversation that these are the charges that were brought. So could you just tee up those numbers again and help us explain to the people what happens after you make an arrest?
Sure. So thanks, Alderman. Sometimes we forget we do this on a daily basis, and sometimes I forget my audience, so my apologies. So what happens is when officers are out there, and as the commander mentioned, a carjacking occurs, and many times what will occur, just like the commander mentioned, is they flee at extremely high rates of speed. It's extremely dangerous, and just so the public understands, the police department has a policy, and it's a balancing test to ensure we protect the public. What we don't want to do is be chasing a carjacker at 100 miles an hour and then have innocent citizens get killed because the carjacker is fleeing the police. So unfortunately, the carjackers know this, and even if we are fortunate enough to get behind them, many times we turn on the lights and sirens and they flee at extremely high rates of speed. It's very dangerous. So when we are able to arrest them, and we do use air support many times, and that's how we get this done through our helicopter, when we are able to arrest them, many times it's a week after the carjacking occurs, and you have several individuals flee the vehicle. Officers are normally in a foot chase. They have their body cameras on. They're chasing these individuals. Sometimes guns are thrown, and eventually we're able to apprehend them. After we apprehend these individuals, now they are under arrest for being inside that stolen car. Now we know it's a hijacked car, so they're inside a hijacked car. At that point, we work with the state's attorney's office on trying to charge these individuals with the highest appropriate charge. Many times we understand that these offenders more than likely could be the individuals who actually committed the hijacking, who stuck a gun in that person's face and took the car, and then we'll go and show them photo arrays. And as I mentioned earlier, most of the time the victims, there's no way they can identify somebody based upon the offenders covering up their faces and just how quickly it occurs. To the commander's point, many times we do use all the video and technology possible. And I won't go into all the details, but to secure those charges. So to answer your question, Alderman, when we get those people in custody, we always go for the highest charge. And if we meet the standard, which I know the state's attorneys will talk about, if we meet the standard, then we work with the state's attorney's office to secure that vehicular hijacking or aggravated vehicular hijacking charge, which would mean it would be done with a gun or some sort of use of force. If we cannot secure those specific charges, then at the end of the day, what we have several individuals who are driving around in a stolen car, and then they meet the standard of a criminal trespass to vehicle, which is a misdemeanor, meaning they had no permission to be in your vehicle. So even though it was a hijacked vehicle, we still, many times we cannot prove that the people that we caught in the car were the actual hijackers. And there's all kinds of different reasons for that. I mentioned the easy one is it's so hard to make an identification. I do want to let people know on the call that there are many other ways that we work with the state's attorney's office to try to overcome that hurdle, but that's the easiest one where it's very difficult to prove up the charge. So then many times we go down to that criminal trespass to vehicle, and we have thousands of arrests per year for that specific charge. Does that answer it, Alderman?
Yeah, that's setting up the stage though, so that in 2021, let's say in 2020, 61 people were ultimately charged with vehicular hijacking. 117 were charged with aggravated vehicular hijacking, which means using a weapon, right? That's what aggravated is?
Yep, using weapon or some sort of aggravated force.
Yes, and then 949 criminal trespass to vehicle, which is really everybody who you just found in a car or people that you couldn't quite get to charge them with one of the other two counts, right?
Correct.
Okay, so this is that sets the stage. And with that, I'd now like to introduce the first of our two members of the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. We have with us first Chief Miriam Ahmad she's the hardworking chief of our juvenile justice bureau. I will tell you that I speak with Chief Ahmad frequently when we have a serious juvenile case, and maybe not even some not so serious juvenile cases in our community, in order to follow up and get guidance. And so she's really been very, very involved in this issue of carjacking. And Chief Ahmad, I hope you can tell us how it's handled in the juvenile justice system. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Chief Deenihan. Thank you, Alderman Smith. Thank you, Alderman Tunney, for inviting us to speak with you and your residents this evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mariam Ahmed. I am the Chief of the Juvenile Justice Bureau for the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. A little bit about what I do. I oversee all of Cook County's child protection prosecutions, which is the prosecutions of the abuse, neglect, and dependency cases. And I oversee all of Cook County's juvenile delinquency prosecutions, which are all of the misdemeanor and felony criminal cases committed by juveniles throughout Cook County. Our case screening process, first of all, involves working directly with every law enforcement department in Cook County. We work closely with the police, in fact, at every step in our process. And you have already heard from the police who have spoken this evening how much we value that relationship and that collaboration. And as I speak this evening, I'll explain some of the ways that we interact with the police and what it means when we say we work together significantly. Let me begin by explaining what our process is. Juvenile court is quite mysterious to most of our residents, primarily because unlike adult criminal proceedings, juvenile proceedings are private in nature and closed to the public, and that's by law. And so I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to remove the veil and explain some of the intricacies of what our process is. First, the police bring us cases to review for criminal charges. We can only review cases that are brought to us by the police. There are two major differences between juvenile crime and adult crime. Those differences are the age of the offender, meaning persons under the age of 18 years old, and the sentence outcome. And I saw a number of inquiries in the chat about the sentence outcome. Well, that is actually by law one of the major distinctions of juvenile court. The process of proving a case in court, however, is exactly the same for juveniles in juvenile court as it is for adults in adult court. The same level of evidence is required. And by that, I mean, there's no kiddie standard of evidence. The police have to work just as hard to prove up a juvenile offense as they do an adult court offense. When the police bring the Cook County State's Attorney Office Juvenile Justice Division a case, the assistant state's attorneys, that is the prosecutors, those attorneys who work for the Cook County State's Attorney's Office in juvenile court, review the cases that are brought by the police. And when these assistant state's attorneys are doing that first review, they're determining two things. First, they're determining whether or not probable cause exists. This means, is there sufficient evidence that a crime was committed? And sufficient evidence, meaning it's more likely than not that the offender that the police have arrested actually committed that crime. That's probable cause. The second question that the assistant state's attorney is engaging in or is asking when they do that first review of a case that's brought to us is, if I charge this case, do I have a reasonable belief that I can meet my burden of proof as to each element of the crime charge? And our burden of proof by law, as many of you know, is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That is the standard that must be met in every courtroom and every courthouse in Cook County for criminal court. Cases are brought into court and the juvenile offender appears before a juvenile court judge. On the first court date, the judge in juvenile court is making two determinations. The first determination, is there probable cause? And to reiterate, that means, is it more likely than not that an offense was committed, a crime was committed, and that the person who stands in front of the judge is actually the person who committed the crime. And if the judge is convinced, he or she will actually make a finding of probable cause. Because there are no monetary bonds in juvenile court by law, the second analysis that the judge engages in is called a finding or a determination of urgent and immediate necessity. That means whether or not this is an offender that the judge should hold in custody, or in plain language, is this someone that the judge should put in jail? To make this determination, the judge evaluates the nature of the crime. Is this a violent crime? Whether the juvenile has had prior court conduct. The judge also evaluates whether the juvenile is a threat to the community, others, himself, or threat of retribution based on the allegations of the offense he or she is alleged to have committed. And finally, the judge is evaluating the circumstances in that juvenile's home based on an inquiry of the parent, the guardian, and the juvenile offender. If the judge determines that urgent and immediate necessity exists at that first court date, then the juvenile judge will order a continuous hold in custody, and the juvenile remains at the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center. The court can also order, at that initial court hearing, electronic home monitoring, an unsecure but supervised custody at an unsecured or supervised facility, or the judge can order the offender to return home and give that offender a curfew. However, when a judge is evaluating offenders charged with vehicular hijacking or vehicular carjacking or aggravated vehicular carjacking, meaning that a weapon was used, or it's a victim over 60 years old, or it's a situation where there is another enhancing factor, it is my personal experience that the judges do not release that juvenile offender to go home or electronic monitoring. It's my experience in the vast number of cases that the judge is ordering a hold in custody because of the nature of the offense. Now, in juvenile court, some juveniles are eventually stepped down to electronic monitoring and permitted to go home on electronic monitoring. That's because pre-trial detention rules are different for juveniles. Juveniles can only be held in court pre-trial for up to 75 days at the most. For many cases, it's only 45 days before being released on electronic monitoring. If the court releases a juvenile on electronic monitoring and that juvenile violates the condition of that release, meaning he or she cuts his monitor or absconds from his home, the state's attorney comes into court the next court date and asks the judge to issue a warrant for that juvenile's arrest. So a juvenile arrest warrant is issued in those circumstances. I would also like to share data from the Cook County State's Attorney's Office Juvenile Justice Division's prosecutions of carjackings. In 2020, the Cook County State's Attorney's Office Juvenile Justice Division received 87 carjacking cases from the Chicago Police Department. The Juvenile Justice Division charged 77 cases, 77 of those cases in court, with a charge approval rating of 89%. The charge approval percentage for carjackings in 2019 was 92%, and in 2018, our charge approval rate was 97% of the cases received from the Chicago Police Department for carjacking offenses we prosecuted. While COVID-19 and the wearing of facial coverings has challenged us, we are still successfully filing charges based on science, eyewitness testimony, witness descriptions, surveillance technology, police grit and determination, and tips from our city's residents. Let me say that again, and tips from our city's residents. As we talk about police and prosecutors being a part of a process and being a part of a team, the city's residents are also an integral part of that team. I mentioned earlier that the sentence outcomes for juvenile offenders is different than for adults. This is in accordance with juvenile law and Illinois law. The sentence range for carjackings is anywhere from 5 years court probation up to incarceration in the Illinois Department of Juvenile Justice until the age of 21. Regarding strategies and initiatives on which we are currently working with police departments, one is the immediate provision of juvenile arrest warrant information to police departments so that if a juvenile cuts his electronic monitoring anklet or flees his home, we will immediately notify the police of the warrant. Utilizing criminal conduct posted by juvenile involved youth on social media. For most youth, most juveniles, if a crime occurs, it didn't happen for real unless they post it on social media. And so we find that these youth are not operating in a vacuum. Many of them are posting their offenses on social media, and many of them have hundreds, if not thousands, of followers. Continuing training of police officers on working up juvenile felony cases and some of the distinctions in working up cases between adult court and juvenile court. Facilitating charging and the issuance of arrest warrants for police departments for specifically juvenile offenders. Filing enhanced penalty provisions when we meet the following criteria, and continuing to work with police, not only Chicago police and the policing departments in Cook County, but also the federal law enforcement task forces and agencies, and serving as a conduit of sharing information among all of the county's police departments, particularly on these carjacking rings. Juvenile carjacking rings do not operate in one area. They're often operating countywide. That's a lot of information really fast. I'm happy to answer any additional questions you might have. Thank you very much, and thank you for allowing me to share.
Well, thank you very much, Chief Ahmad. That was a lot of really helpful information, and I know that there are going to be a lot of other questions. But I think I'll ask your co-chief here, Natosha Toller, the chief of the Criminal Prosecutions Bureau, which is chief of all the crime, adult crime, prosecuting Cook County. And if you could tell us about our strategy of prosecutions for vehicular hijackers. And I'm also asked Ms. Toller to talk to us about the summer, because we're here and people want to know about the looting that occurred over the summer. What are the status of those cases too? But thank you so much for joining us, Chief Toller.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone for having us here, to both of our aldermen for putting this together, for all the panelists, and thank you to everyone for tuning in tonight. My name is Natasha Toller. I am the Chief of the Criminal Prosecutions Bureau for the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. And I want to briefly address with you all, you heard a lot, I don't want to repeat what the review is, but I want to talk to you all about the adult cases that come in, specifically what we're looking at. What are the charges that we can file? What are our sentencing ranges? And I'm also going to touch on what Alderman Smith asked me to also provide with regards to the summer numbers. So essentially, the state's attorney's office, what we do is we come in after the arrests are made. And so concerning the adult cases, once that arrest is made, then we review it. When they present it to us, we review it and look at it, and that's reviewed by our felony review unit. Now, Chief Ahmad talked to you about what that review process looks like. It's the same for juvenile and adult and what we're looking for in our cases. We do not review misdemeanor cases because misdemeanors are filed directly by our law enforcement agencies. So in 2020, we were presented with 76 vehicular hijacking cases. We approved 74 for vehicular hijacking. That's a 97% approval rating for what was presented to us by the city of Chicago. That does not include the suburban numbers. In 2021, so far, what has been presented to us, we have approved them. And I believe the number is approximately 5 of those cases so far for this month. We have taken care of that, and all of those have been approved. So what happens after we review a case, we approve the charges, what's next? And it's imperative because I've also seen some questions on the chat to talk about that next process, which is bond court. The offender will then go before the judge at bond court. And what we do at that point, it is the state, we say to the judge, we present all of the facts of the case. We present what the offender's background is. We talk about any other relevant and pertinent information that we have at the time that we can present to the judge. And then the defense attorney who represents that offender will speak to the judge and provide mitigation. But ultimately, after the judge has heard from the state, after the judge has heard from the defense, the judge sets the bond. We do not set bond. The judge will determine what amount is set. The judge determines if someone is going to be given electronic monitoring, even after all that we've said. The judge makes that determination and will set any other conditions. I also want to point out a few things that we see in bond court. If an offender is arrested, and that offender has a pending case, or that offender was on probation, at bond court, we as the state's attorney will file what is called a violation of bail bond or a violation of probation. So if that person had a pending case, we file a violation of bail bond. If that person was on probation at the time, we file a violation of probation. And at that time, we're asking the judge, because they had a pending case or because they were on probation, to hold the individual no bail. But by law, by statute, that person then will be allowed a hearing within a specified amount of time, typically 48 hours on that violation of bail bond. That case will then go back before the judge that it's originally at for the judge to determine what the bond will be on that violation, whether it's a violation of a bail bond or a violation of probation. So then what do we look at when we have the charges? Because I want to talk about the different charges and what that sentencing range looks like. First of all, you can have the vehicular hijacking. That's been mentioned a lot. What does that even mean? That means the offender has taken the vehicle by force or threat of force. He has taken that vehicle from a person. So with a vehicular hijacking, that is not probationable. And the sentencing range is 4 years to 15 years in the Department of Corrections. Now, of course, there are differences if they have a background, depending on what that background is, but I'm going to provide you with the basic. Then you have aggravated vehicular hijacking. That means Of course, again, what vehicular hijacking means, take the vehicle from a person by force or threat of force. But there's some aggravating circumstances to that that allows us to get a higher sentence. The victim was over the age of 60. Somebody in that car at the time of the carjacking, was there a child in that car? Was there someone in the car that was 16 years or younger? Was there a dangerous weapon used? Was there a firearm used? And with that firearm comes enhancements. Did the offender take it with the firearm? Was the firearm discharged? And in the discharge of that firearm, was someone seriously hurt or shot or killed? An aggravated vehicular hijacking holds with it a sentence range of 6 to 30 years in the Department of Corrections. If it's with a dangerous weapon, it's 7 to 30 years. With that firearm, which is very important as an adult, that's where the enhancements can come into play. Because if you use it and use the firearm to take it, now your minimum is 21 years in the Department of Corrections. If you use that firearm and discharge it and someone dies or is seriously hurt, you can be looking at up to life in prison. Then we get to what's typically what you start to see with Chief Deenihan's pictures here is the possession of a stolen motor vehicle and the criminal trespass to vehicle. Possession of a stolen motor vehicle is only a Class 2 felony. It's probationable, and it's 3 to 7 years in the Department of Corrections. That is where the person is not entitled to possessing that car, and the offender knows it was stolen. Now, the legislator has expanded what a defendant's knowledge is, and I bring that up because back when we first started with the PSMVs, without a defendant's statement, without something to say that the column was peeled, we had a difficult time showing that the defendant knew he was in a stolen car, especially if he had the keys and didn't make a statement. So the law has expanded that for us to really know and infer from the surrounding facts and circumstances, he knows he's in a stolen car. I still have to have the victim come in and say, I don't know him, and I didn't give him permission to be in my car. Because sometimes we'll see where all of a sudden the offenders say, well, such and such gave me the car, or I know the victim in the case, and they don't. So we have that person come in and say, I don't know who that is. You then have what's called criminal trespass to vehicle. That's a misdemeanor. Penalty is no more than 364 days in county jail. And the law under that says when someone knowingly enters without permission of the owner, any part of the vehicle. And I give you this example. If I am driving a stolen car and I have 3 of my friends in that car and I am apprehended by police, I am the only one in that car who would be charged with possessing a stolen vehicle. Everyone else in that car, the front passenger and the 2 in the back, under the law, are going to be charged with a misdemeanor. They are going to be charged with criminal trespass to vehicle. So that briefly explains the review process, that briefly explains the charges and the sentences. I want to say to you, even in 2020, even dealing with COVID issues, we did successfully, we had 27 vehicular hijacking cases, that we prosecuted. 25 we successfully convicted last year, even under COVID circumstances. Courts are starting to kind of come back. We're starting back with in-person litigation and hopefully soon with jury trials to continue to move these. As for possession of a stolen motor vehicle, 193 people were charged and prosecuted in 2020. Only 10 of those cases were reduced to criminal trespass to vehicle, and those pled guilty. We did not dismiss any of those cases. And just to add to the solution, when we all talk on here about how we all are working together, we are. This really is an all hands on deck because we have had just a terrible explosion of carjackings in our city and in our suburbs. We're working to figure out ways beyond just someone wearing a mask and how we can make identifications. What can we use to enhance our cases and to make them better together? Working with our federal partners on how we can use our resources, what we can do about looking into long-term investigations and how we can connect the dots together with law enforcement and with our federal partners. We are also looking at other ways to look into how we are doing at bond court. What other information can we gather with the help of our law enforcement partners and our federal partners to present that at bond court in the hopes that the judge, when they hear this information, will look to enhance the bail amount. We also need the help of our communities. I reiterate that because, as my partner, Chief Ahmad, said, we all have to work together. Everyone posts everything on social media, but unless we know about it, there's nothing we can do. We have seen offenders with 4,000 friends who have seen that person post about carjackings and other things, and no one ever said a word. We cannot move forward like that. We have to have the help of everyone when you see something to say something. And I thank all of you for this time because I know we do want to get to the questions. So thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Chief. That was just great. I think we can stop the screen share now so everyone can see the panel. Thanks a lot. And we're going to start moving through the questions. And the way that we're going to do this is I'll go through a few, and then we'll ask Alderman Tunney to go through a few. And I do see already, as we are going, there's about 71 questions posted. I don't know that we'll get through them all, but a lot of them are the same, are very similar. So the staff is going to try to, put as many of these questions together as we can, because, this is sort of the heart of the matter. And so, and this, as you can see, people have been voting up questions. So the first question is really for the state's attorney's office, and it is a concern because it gets reported in the press frequently to us, that people who are arrested for carjacking and other crimes are indeed out on bail for some other offense. What do we say about that? What do you say about that? And when you say that, what can be done to help protect people while people are apparently recommitting offenses? This is reported so often. So I guess we want your help in that regard.
So that does happen periodically, where offenders are out on a condition of release and commit another offense. And when that happens, the state's attorney's office does bring additional charges and ask the judge to re-detain that youth. But keep in mind something I said earlier. The pre-trial detention periods are determined by statute. And so for crimes other than murder and criminal sexual assault by statute, offenders cannot be detained continuously unless their trial occurs within 45 days of that initial detention. And one of the impacts of COVID-19 has been the delay in cases proceeding to trial. So the pre-trial periods have been longer. But I do find that when offenders violate those conditions of release, that the members of the court do re-detain those youth. Similarly, when a youth violates electronic monitoring, that electronic monitoring is revoked. One of the things we're striving to do is ensure that the law enforcement departments, all of the police departments, know when a person has violated a condition of release and a juvenile arrest warrant has been issued, to shorten the amount of time that that offender is out on the street potentially committing more crime.
And how do you get notified that someone has cut their electronic monitoring? How do you even know about that, either of you?
So I can talk about the differences between electronic monitoring in juvenile court versus adult court. In adult court, electronic monitoring is overseen by the Cook County Sheriff, law enforcement officers, police officers in their own right. So if an adult offender steps out of the house, cuts his or her monitor, the sheriff is immediately notified and they are out there, those officers searching for that offender. In juvenile court, electronic monitoring is monitored by probation staff members. These are not police officers. So when that information is made available to the state's attorney, if it's a juvenile who has cut the monitor and whose whereabouts are unknown, we are able to file immediate motions to the court to ask for a juvenile arrest warrant. If the offender indicates that he or she forgot to charge the battery of their monitor, steps out, but then comes back in, we might not be notified of those infractions. The probation department has the discretion whether or not to communicate that information to the court.
So I'm gonna just follow up on that question. Yeah, and ask Natasha, do you get notified immediately? I mean, does the bell go off and you get told, oh, this guy skipped out on his electronic monitoring?
So just to add from the adult perspective, because it is overseen by the Cook County Sheriff's Office. So they have to alert us. So what happens is the Sheriff's Office will send paperwork. And as someone who gets the paperwork, what happens is it's sent either to myself or to the Deputy Chief of Criminal or to the supervisors in the various districts. Once we are in receipt of those paperwork, it is immediately sent to the assistants that handle those cases in that courtrooms, because we're doing something. This is what we're doing. If they cut it and they go AWOL, we are immediately filing the paperwork because we want a warrant on them. We want that warrant to be out there because that helps us to, we share that information, and that's what we have to do is share that information with our police and our law enforcement agencies, as Chief Ahmad was just saying, so we can get these individuals in custody. The other thing you will see is electronic monitoring technical violations. When we receive paperwork that someone has been reincarcerated because maybe they violated curfew, they did something that is a red flag, we will file the paperwork that I talked about, that violation of bail bond. When we file that paperwork and say they violated the conditions of their bail, they go before the judge and there's a hearing again for where we discuss. And what you will hear is that a lot of times there's a contact person we have for the sheriffs. They will also join us at times for those hearings, and they come in via Zoom to answer any questions. But again, the judge will hear it, and then the judge determines, is that person going to be let back out on electronic monitoring? It's ultimately up to the judge. Does that judge increase the bond in some way? Ultimately, it's up to the judge. But we do file the necessary paperwork alerting the court that something has been violated for some reason.
So I'll just follow up on that, just so that people can understand how this works. How long does that process take? That you get notified? Is it like a couple weeks? Is it a month? That you get notified someone's AWOL or something, because that's an electronic thing, clearly. And then there's all this followed by paperwork. How long does that process take?
So let's say yesterday someone sent paperwork to say that an offender went AWOL. Well, that immediately goes to my assistants in the courtroom. And of course, under COVID, their court dates are every other day. So as soon as that every other day, they will put that case on the call, and then they will seek a warrant before that judge. If it's something where it's a technical violation, again, we'll put it up there because we have to alert the defense attorney as well. So we'll motion it up to have it heard, and it's heard as soon as it can be by the judge. We're also working with the sheriffs right now, where if we even find that there was a delay being heard, like they're still in custody and there's a delay to that, we're motioning those up so that there is a hearing to be heard to address it. So we're working around the COVID dates, but we're doing it as soon as possible that'll allow for it to get on that court call. But as soon as we receive notice, we're moving on it.
We're a little different, Alderman Smith, in juvenile court. Mm-hmm. When a minor is out of placement, has absconded, we are notified immediately. And so that next morning, we are motioning the case on the call and asking the judge for a juvenile arrest warrant. The reason being because it's a minor, and if they are not at home, it's a more serious situation. So for those cases, even during COVID, those are heard every day when they happen.
Okay. So those cases when it's reported that someone was out on electronic monitoring, what does that tell us? does it suggest that you guys have already filed something and that action is pending? Does it suggest that like the paperwork hasn't gotten to you yet? What does that mean to us?
So
Given
I can
what you said.
There have been a number of cases where a juvenile has been out on electronic monitoring, absconded, has an active juvenile arrest warrant, and has picked up additional cases. And I've seen in the press reports that this juvenile A was committing crimes on electronic monitoring. But what the public doesn't know and the media doesn't report under those circumstances is that the minor actually had an active warrant.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to understand that, yes, if you cut the cord, then someone has to find you at that point. And there could be a warrant, but you have to be found.
And can I go back to something Chief Toller said and that I also said earlier about social media? If I had $1 for every time somebody posted on social media this criminal activity, including having cut an electronic monitoring device, these individuals are not operating in the shadows. They're actually operating very publicly. And let me say this too. Most of us who have social media have private pages, meaning the only people who can access our pages are our friends. Most of these individuals have public pages, meaning they make no attempt to keep private. Many times, not always, but in many cases, make no attempt to keep private their social media accounts. And for parents who have teenagers, you want to know what's going on, ask your kids, because your kids know. They know.
Yeah. Yes, maybe that would be a fertile field for young internet sleuths to help get this information to the police. I have one more question that's focused on you guys. I'm sort of going in order, which is it's from Sam Royko. You can see the whole question. Repeat offenders always drive everybody crazy. You guys, us, the police, drive repeat offenders. So when the press reports on a young person who had apparently juvenile record and got punished for juvenile crime and then now is arrested as an adult, please help us understand that. The question is an article on Dylan Sanders. If you see the thing in the question box, a 21-year-old who was reportedly arrested 13 times in 14 months, got 2 years probation for his role in a carjacking 2 years ago when, well, he may have been I don't know if he was a minor or not. What happens in a situation like this and how common is this?
I can tell you this. When a person has gone through the juvenile system and has adjudications, which is juvenile nomenclature for conviction, if that person commits an adult offense, those adjudications are given, that information is given to the judge at a bond court hearing. So that information is made known to a judge when that individual reoffends.
And just to piggyback off of that, when we are in bond court, we do have their juvenile history ran to know and be aware of what the juvenile history is, especially when they're at that a younger age of 18, 19, 20, 21. We're looking to see what that history is. All of that is presented at bond court.
Thanks. And I guess let me just follow up and then Alderman Tunney, if you want to take the next couple questions. How often, I know that you guys go in to bond court and make a recommendation. How often are your recommendations not followed?
Well, I can tell you, I mean, speaking from what our recommendations are, let's say, for instance, we'll ask for mandatory no bails on certain crimes because it's mandatory. Surprisingly, even when mandatory, I've seen bond set, and that's still, is surprising. We file discretionary no bail holds. So it's discretionary for the court to hold a no bail. We'll file the petitions. What that data is, I don't have the data offhand, and we can look to see what that is and supply that to you at a later date. But we do walk in and file the necessary petitions that we're allowed to file under the law. And so, again, it is up to the judge then to say what they want to do. If it's discretionary, the judge doesn't have to hold them no bail.
Right.
It's up to the court to do that. But we do file the appropriate paperwork in all of those cases, including the violation of bail bonds that I told you about, and including the violation of probations that I told you about.
Are you getting pushback to detentions because of COVID? And, you know, the issues in the jail and things like that? Have you changed your, is this just is there a COVID issue here? That you're getting some?
I can speak for juvenile. I'll let Chief Toller speak for adults. Certainly, because we in the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center, we not only house individuals who are charged with violent felony offenses such as armed robbery, meaning robbery with a firearm, or aggravated vehicular hijacking, taking a car from the presence of or person of a victim by using force. But we also have juveniles who are charged with murder, aggravated sexual offenses, and attempted murder. So for those reasons, these are individuals who the court has determined must remain at the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center because of the nature of the charges against them and the potential threat to public safety. And the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center is striving to follow CDC recommendations in terms of social distancing, in terms of the number of individuals in detention cells to prevent an outbreak of COVID-19 at the JTDC. And so whereas state law might permit pretrial detention up to 75 days for violent offenders, that detention status is reviewed every 30 days. That is primarily due to COVID and the Juvenile Court Act, which mandates a review. And if a minor has exhibited good behavior during his detention at the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center, meaning is attending court, is following the rules and being cooperative and so forth, a judge will step down that juvenile offender charged with either robbery, armed robbery, vehicular hijacking to electronic home monitoring. However, if that minor violates any of the court's provisions related to that electronic monitoring, they will issue a juvenile arrest warrant for that minor.
All right. Thank you very much. Alderman Tunney, if you want to ask the next few questions.
Thank you, Alderman. I want to change the subject a little bit, but dovetail on your remarks about the looting that happened over the summer. And in the chat, and obviously many of us who live on the north side see the tremendous amount of resources in the Central Business District and or Michigan Avenue. So has there been a redeployment back to the districts in the last couple of months? Because there seems to be a complaint by a number of aldermen that there's too many resources downtown protecting either the Magnificent Mile or Central Business District and less resources in the neighboring districts. Who's going to comment on that? We used to get stats actually on resources in each district, and I think they've fallen by the wayside under Superintendent Brown. Hello.
Commanders.
There you go.
How are you feeling?
Yeah, so the question is what is being deployed downtown? So I think with the strategy that's been taking place for downtown is they're taking a few officers from each district and detailing them downtown for short periods of time. So it's not fully affecting the districts, but it's adding more manpower where it's potentially needed at this point.
Well, that was the case certainly during the summer, but I can tell you that we used to get from headquarters the sworn strength in each of our districts, and that has not been happening. And we've been kind of going in the blind, even though that our crime stats are lower, the carjackings are higher. And, there's the criticism that Chicago has plenty of police officers per capita. And unless someone tells me why Chicago crime is any different than New York or LA, and I've brought this up in budget hearings over the years, what's so different about Chicago crime than New York or LA? Because the amount of officers per capita seems to be just fine and adequate for Chicago, but yet we've had more homicides in Chicago than New York and LA combined. So what's so unique about Chicago?
So I don't know how you expect me to answer that question. I believe
I'm not. It's not just to you, Commander. I'm just saying it to the team because that's certainly coming up from the community, and we're here to try to address the issues from the community perspective. And you guys are the experts on whether it's Chief Deenihan or the commanders. We need to be accountable to our citizens about safety because we have the adequate resources, and for the life of the residents saying why is the homicide rate and these serious crime so much more in Chicago than it is with these other major cities? And it's an open-ended question. It's not specific to you, Chris. It's just we all need to be held responsible for the safety of our neighborhoods and our city.
All right, Chief. I think Chief Deenihan is trying to respond, but his video just went out. Is that right, Chief? Are you there? I think he's having technical difficulty. Says his video is working. Chief, can you hear us? All right, I guess not. We'll try to get him online. We'll try to get him back. Alderman Tunney, sorry.
Right, and I guess it since it's rising to the top, there's a criticism that our mayor isn't really talking much about carjackings. And it's certainly a question from a number of our panelists here or our residents here is, we have got to all take responsibility in regards to the safety of our communities. And, I know that the people on the call tonight, we're all trying to work as a team, whether it's the judges, the state's attorneys, and the police. But I can tell you that obviously there's a lot of dissatisfaction in the people that are on this call tonight. And, I'm not pointing fingers, but I don't think our police budget is it's certainly public safety is 60% of our budget, and it's really disheartening for people to see the fact that we're spending the resources and, I think a lot of people are unhappy with the results. And, again, it's not specific, it's to the whole team. And, I know there's a lot of frustration on the call tonight about whether, what we're going to do about it. And again, I'm not talking about our commander in 19 or 18, but there's got to be a citywide response to the level of violent crime in the city.
Well, I certainly agree with you, Alderman Tunney. And we know that certainly with regard to these carjackings, that's the reason that we're having this forum. And to that end, I think that responds quite a bit to Stephanie Munger's question here about who is it that's responsible for this. And I think that I'm sorry we had a technical difficulty with Chief Deenihan. I'm sure we'll get him back. I guess let me ask this of one of the state's attorneys. How do you feel that working these cases is going with your closer cooperation with Chief of Detectives and the officers on the beat? You mentioned training and things like that. What's the impact of that on the ability to get charges and ultimately convictions?
What a lot of folks don't realize is just how much we communicate. It's often several times a day. And like crime doesn't stop 24/7, we don't either. And so we're not only working in concert with the Chicago police, but I mentioned our work with the other law enforcement agencies as well, Cook County. And we're constantly relaying information between the various departments regarding investigations. We're also working directly with the police to assist them in ensuring that we can meet those standards that I mentioned in my opening statement, the probable cause, the proof beyond a reasonable doubt. A couple of weeks ago at the City Hall presentation, Chief Deenihan showed us a slide that I'd like to just bring up really quickly. The slide was of 2020 and showed when the acceleration of vehicular hijacking offenses occurred. And the point of ascension coincided with the stay-at-home order for COVID-19. And so for me in juvenile court, and for many of you with your own life experience, we know that if young people aren't engaged, aren't in school, then they will be involved in activities that we find troubling. And that's indeed what's happening now. Additionally, there's some other considerations that I find are impacting these numbers. When I look at some of the communities where the offenders are coming from, I also see the correlation between the fact that these are communities where many of the parents are frontline workers during this pandemic. And so if you're stocking the shelves at Walmart, or you're dispensing the medication at Walgreens, or if you're filling the shelves at the Jewel, you're not in your home. You're not able to work from home. And so your child, instead of being homeschooled by you as the parent, is not being homeschooled or is out, unfortunately, in many cases, running the streets. And so I don't think that we can look at this acceleration of crime in a vacuum. We have to consider all of these other factors that have impacted the increase of these offenses in 2020 versus 2019 and 2018.
Yes, thank you for that answer. Did somebody else want to say something?
Well, I know Chief Deenihan is back, but just to piggyback off of what our working relationship looks like, as Chief Ahmad was just saying to you, we work 24/7. Felony review is 24/7. You know, the chiefs on this call, commanders on this call, they know that we can call each other and talk to each other anytime about our cases. When we talked about these vehicular hijackings and the task force, Chief Deenihan knows we've given point people out of criminal, point people out of our special prosecutions unit to work around the long-term investigations, point person out of juvenile, that they have the contact and the resources that we all meet together, discuss these cases. What more do we need? How can we take these individuals down? Is there connections between the city and the suburban agencies? So we're all working together because to reiterate what that means is because we realize this isn't all hands on deck. We realize it's not just enough to investigate it. It's not just enough to arrest it, but now when we get it into the system, we got to make it stick. So we're working together to ensure that.
Well, thank you. And now that Chief Deenihan is back, I wanted to quickly combine a couple questions, which here they are, Chief. Put them together. Are there specific types of cars that are being targeted? What can we do as individuals to prevent ourselves from being a victim? Is there something? Is there a specific area of the city that is being targeted? Are there more on the north side? Are there more on the south side?
Sure.
And then, is it safe to get gas for my car even? So people are asking about the impact on them and how they can deal with this.
Got it. So there was a lot of questions there, Alderwoman. So the first thing is the cars. Are there specific cars being targeted? So for the carjackings, the answer is no. The top 10 cars that are carjacked for last year are the same cars that you see out there. It's probably the top 10 selling cars, meaning the Toyota Camrys, the Honda Civics, the majority of the cars that you're going to see out there. Right now, from what we're seeing, is it's a crime of opportunity for the offenders, meaning if they see someone, if they're in a carjacked car already, which they usually are, and they're driving down the street and they see someone texting in their car or sitting in their car, very many times they're going to pull right up, they're going to stick a gun in their face, and they're going to take the car. So they're not looking for a specific car. That's the answer. There's some misinformation that they're only looking for these Jeep SRTs or these Dodge Challengers, et cetera. So that is not, that's not true for the carjackings. They're going to take any car that they can. And most of what we have seen are people sitting in their cars maybe for a little bit too long. Now, with that said, I want everybody on the call to understand there's no blame to the victims at all. So many times victims are just driving up to their residences. They park. By the time that they parallel park or get out of their car, offenders happen to be in a car and pull right up on them and either take their keys when they get out of the vehicle or while they're still in their vehicle. So the tips would be, and I will, both aldermen, I'll ensure that I share, we have a flyer that we can share. I'll share with both commanders. We'll get out to the aldermen to push it out through social media. It's already on the CPD website, but so you guys can get it out to your constituents on things you can do in order to lessen your prevention. So obviously, yes, get gas and do the things that you need to do to live a normal life, but please be safe. And I think everyone on the call, from some of the people the victims that we've interviewed, some of them, it happens so quickly, they don't even realize. I know that we're all kind of staring into our phones constantly. So the message is, don't do that when you're leaving your house, walking to your car, get in your car and go. Don't sit in your car texting, whether you're in front of your house or where you're going to work, or even if you are at a gas station. Stay off your phone while you're in your car. Be aware of your surroundings as best as possible. And use your instincts. We talked, a lot of people said, I thought something was wrong, and they knew something was wrong, but they just, they weren't sure. Sometimes people come and knock on the window and say, hey, your tire's low, and people get out, then they take their car, and they knew they shouldn't have got out. They knew something was wrong. So please use your instincts and drive away if you feel threatened, or if you're coming out to get in your car, or if you're getting gas. If you feel something isn't right, walk into the gas station. So please use your instincts. So that would be the answer for the cars and the prevention. As far as the areas that are being targeted, I know I went through the maps very quickly, but it's not the constituents that we're talking with on the call. They're not coming up to the north side specifically to carjack people for specific reasons. The majority of the carjackings are still predominantly on the south and west sides, even though there are carjackings obviously occurring in your area. That's why we're here talking about it today. And it doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter if you're in a northwest suburb that's extremely wealthy, or if you're in a south suburb that happens to be poor. The carjackings are happening everywhere, but it's not it's not a specific car. So please just be aware of your surroundings. And I know Chief Ahmad and Chief Tyler were talking about the social media. So that is accurate. And we have all kinds of different ways to share information with the police department. Text a tip. If you just Google Chicago Police Department share information, there's ways you can share through tip messages. There's ways you can share social media, several other ways, and then we will be able to follow up with that. As they mentioned, a lot of these guys are posting on social media, but I also want to warn that it's not as easy as somebody sends a picture with an anonymous name, anonymous person who's posting up a video with a gun at an unknown location. It's not that simple for the police department to just go out and arrest and find that guy. So to both the chief's points when they were speaking, parents, friends, if you know people are doing it, text a tip or text the information to the police department, and we will follow up on it. And then lastly, Alderman, I'll backtrack to Alderman Tunney's question, just kind of like, hey, officers per capita versus New York and LA, and what are some of the differences? So some of the differences that we have seen across the cities is, and it's kind of some of the things we're talking about today. And what I've seen from doing the studies, because I'm in charge of the detective division and I'm in charge of the homicides and the clearance rates, and there's always talks about clearance rate. So I work with our partners from New York and LA, and I've read all the studies. And one of the things that some people forget is during the 90s, when New York was at like 2,000 murders, they passed laws that if you are carrying a gun with New York, you go to jail for 3 years. And they took it out of the state's attorney's hands. They actually took it out of the judge's hands. If you got caught with a gun, you went to jail for 3 years. And their crime came down, and that was passed, through laws. So that's some of the differences that we see. And in Los Angeles, if people remember, they were the ones who had 3 strikes and you're out. And once again, that was passed through legislation. And I know there's lots of talk about that. And actually now the pendulum swung the other way, and they're letting people out on that 3-strike law. But LA also went through a period in the early 2000s where they did, if you do a crime with a gun and you're done. And what that was meant, it was the same thing. It was passed through legislation, but it took everything, all the power away from any of the judges. And if you did a crime with a gun, there were mandatory sentencing laws, and people went to jail for a long period of time. And those are some things that we never did in Chicago. So that's some of the differences between LA, New York, and Chicago, like the Alderman saying, officers per capita. So those are some of the things that did happen through all the studies that I've read, that there are differences that occurred. And now, like I said, I would say that the pendulum's swinging the other way. In LA, they're definitely letting people out on that. So that's just an answer to that question. Did I answer all the questions, Alderwoman, about the prevention and cars that are being taken?
Yeah, you sure did. But I'll add one more, which is,
well, let me interrupt for a second.
Topic. And then you,
Alderman Smith, let me interrupt on that one.
Go ahead.
I appreciate the comparisons. As you said, the pendulum is not moving to the right on this issue. In regards to, I think when you think of the 90s in New York, I think you're thinking of Rudy Giuliani and some of his rise to power, so to speak. And that is certainly not the tenor of what's happening today. In fact, as you well know, the pendulum is moving to the left. And what I wanted to just ask, just one other question about the carjackings in general. Time of day of week, is there some patterns there that our constituents, our listeners need to be aware of?
Yeah, so it's happening every single day of the week, and it's almost even across the board for 2020. So Sunday through Saturday, it's happening every day of the week, and the percentages were 14 to 16% per day. As far as hours are concerned, the strongest hours are between 6 o'clock and 10 o'clock at night, but the hours are the same. They're happening 24/7. So when people are going to work at 7 in the morning, some people go to work at 5 in the morning, they're happening. It's happening at noon. It's happening at 3 in the afternoon. The strongest hours are between 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. at night, but that's not a huge spike because it's all over the place. So that's all the hours that it's occurring, sir.
Thank you, Chief.
Yes, thank you. And the last question I had on this line of questioning was, what's happening with the cars? I think you have the cars. Are the cars being used for some other purpose other than taking a ride?
So there's three buckets here, Alderwoman, that I want everybody to understand. So the first bucket, which is definitely the smallest bucket, are cars that are not recovered. So we recover a majority of the vehicles that are carjacked, okay? Most of them are recovered. But the smallest bucket are cars that are not recovered. And this is carjackings and motor vehicle thefts. And this is what people talk about, like chop shops or cars that get re-tagged. So there are specific cars and maybe some of those higher end cars where there are these high end chop shops where maybe a chop shop will say, I will pay a crew $5,000 for a specific car, and they go out and find that car. Whether it's a motor vehicle theft or if it's a carjacking, they bring that chop shop at the car, they re-tag the vehicle, and then they try to sell it in a illegal way. But that's a very, very small bucket. The second bucket is some of our criminal crews who take the carjacked cars and they use those cars to commit other crimes. They use those cars to commit robberies. They use those cars to commit shootings. They use those cars to commit murders. Then the third bucket, which unfortunately now is the greatest bucket, is people are just taking these cars, basically joyriding, using them for anywhere between 6 and 24 hours, dumping the car, and then just going and getting another car. And that's why we were recovering so many cars. I don't have the data in front of me, but I asked one of my data analysts today, I think over 90% of the cars, even from 2021, this year, from January, have been recovered. The carjacked vehicles, they have been recovered. They're using the car for joyride and they're going and dumping it, and they feel it's so easy to go and just grab another car that they're doing that crime again.
Have we, there's a lot of, looking over these questions, there are a lot of concerns from all of us, as Tom said, about whether or not people who commit crimes should be allowed to be free pending their trials. There's a lot of questions about it, so I won't keep repeating and repeating and repeating. But but we did have a couple of people ask this question: Has there ever been a situation in which the use of pretrial detention has been looked at as part of a strategy of combating a particular crime, so that kind of every, the judicial system, the prosecutors, and the police and the public support doing something different on a policy change because of a particular crime?
I'll take an initial stab at that question, Alderman Smith, because it actually comes up a lot in the area of juveniles. Mm-hmm. The courts, the prosecutors, the police, we all have to follow state law. Mm-hmm. And so we're taking our direction and making decisions based on what is codified in the Juvenile Court Act, the Illinois Juvenile Court Act, which is the governing body of law for juvenile offenses in Illinois. And because you've heard me say throughout the presentation, the limits are this as prescribed by law or according to law, that's what I mean. And so none of us can violate the state law.
Of course. Chief Toller, do you have anything to add on that score? I mean,
it's what we're stuck with. It's when we can file mandatory no bails, when we can file discretionary no bails, filing your violations of probations or bail bonds and the time that they have to be heard. You're stuck with the law as it is, and that's what we follow. And we file the petitions and the bail bond violations and all of those when we can. We're filing them, and then it's ultimately I don't mean to keep reiterating, but then it's ultimately in the hands of the judge to say yay or nay, and set that bond accordingly.
Now, we have a very active court advocacy program in both the 18th and the 19th district. And I will say, if anybody is interested in court advocacy, you can, I don't know what the address is for the 19th district. In the 18th district, it's Al Robinson. You can always, I'm sure, write your alderman at our email addresses, and we can direct you to the court advocacy program. Do you think that having court advocates at bail bond hearings would be a helpful step for the public to say, we want to be safe from people who are using guns to rob people, to deprive people of their cars and possibly get injured? Do you think that would be a helpful step?
The thing is everything's by Zoom right now, right?
Yeah.
And so there are no, we're doing our bond hearings in another location by Zoom. So we can always say, Your Honor, the court advocates are present. It's what we would do if the case was pending, and say that someone is present. what they do with that information, it doesn't hurt to say it, but it would be by Zoom. But again, everything is by Zoom now.
Yeah.
So it's a little harder. I mean, I feel like most of the public is just watching via what is on YouTube. They're not actually into that Zoom hearing with the state, with the defense attorney and the judge.
Well, thank you for that. If anyone's interested, please contact your alderman. All right, Alderman Tunney.
I see that, I've been scrolling through, and I think we've covered quite a bit of the topics. Obviously, we grouped them together. I think that the only thing that I'm seeing a little bit different, and this gets back to more of the support mechanisms for our youth. How and when in the state's attorney's view, when parents are notified or a guardian, what's been give us anecdotally, how you've interacted with parents or guardians of the youth, or even, I guess the youth primarily, because if they're over 18, they might be on their own and living independently. Somebody
Sure. Thank you.
Probably be the best person. Yeah.
Thank you. When cases come into juvenile court, the parents are a party to those proceedings, in as they have a right to be present. And in fact, we have to issue summons to the parents to appear before the court if they have not appeared. In terms of interacting with the parents of juveniles who are charged and stand before the court charged with a criminal offense, the state's attorney's office is not interacting with parents because that child is represented by a defense attorney. And so that parent is interacting with the defense attorney and also interacting with the court. The judge is making inquiries at every court date where the parent or guardian is present. For minors, juveniles who are not detained at the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center, the judges are making inquiry regarding participation in school, obeying the rules of the home, the kinds of questions that any of us would ask a parent were that parent in front of us about what's going on in the home. When youth are in custody, before a judge releases a youth who is in custody to a parent on electronic monitoring, that judge is making inquiries into what's going on in the home. Is this child able to come home on electronic monitoring? Is this a home where you can even have a child or anyone on electronic monitoring? Because in some subsidized housing settings, one can't be in the residence on electronic monitoring. So those questions are being asked, but they're either being asked by the defense attorney or by the court.
Thank you.
Did you have another question you wanted to add? You wanted to follow up on, Tom?
No, I think I'm happy that everyone's been on the call, and I think we've answered a majority of the questions there. I think we were going to have an 8 o'clock cutoff, but unless we find questions that haven't really been addressed, I'm comfortable where we're at, and wanted to thank everyone on the call and my constituents, both in the 18th and 19th district.
Well, we have a couple, thank you. Yes, and I generally agree. There's a couple more, if you don't mind, I think that we want to wrap up with, because a couple people have asked some very specific questions about cars. Do you, first of all, someone wanted to ask the question, is there a typical carjacker or hijacker? Commander Papiano, did you want to answer that?
I can answer it, Alderman.
Okay.
Is there a typical hijacker?
Mm-hmm.
So they're just size, shape?
Well, whatever. I guess age. Is there a?
Yeah, I think so what we put up before, like our arrestees, it's majority of young males. It's young males between the ages of 16 to 20 years of age. A lot of the arrestees have been African American, but I would say there's not that would be about it. I mean, I would just say, be aware of your surroundings. It happens so quick that some people can't even tell, but the age group is definitely males between 16 to 20 years of age.
Okay, and then a couple other recommendation questions. What are your suggestions for parents with children in car seats? There are a couple of very specific things. How do you feel about dash cams? Should we buy dash cams for our cars? Are there any other effective anti-theft devices for cars?
So for the parents, and I know there's a lot of parents on the call, and you have, first of all, you have to keep those kids in car seats because they obviously you have to be safe. A couple things that you could do, and it has helped. People have had dash cam video, even like Uber drivers, that have helped us solve crimes. When someone has taken a vehicle, we were able to get the video because after they carjack the vehicle, they take off their mask and they take off their hoods and they're staring right in the camera. So that can be helpful. I would also talk to your car manufacturers. Many of the newer cars, you could track your car with your phone, and I believe you might have to pay for that service. So we just had an incident, I think 2 days ago with a Lexus, and the person tracked their car for us, and the car was dumped within 4 hours. So there are, there's OnStar that still exists, but there's many of the car companies that offer that, especially for the newer cars. I don't know, I don't have the exact, dates. But for the children, I understand that's everybody's greatest fear. If your child is strapped in a car seat and this happens so quickly, I will say that almost all the time, when a carjacker, if that has occurred and they drove away, we haven't had any carjackers drive away with the kids in the car, but it happens when they're pumping gas, or if someone leaves their kid in their car for less than a few seconds, they always just kind of get rid of the car right away. And we've never had a child harmed, but I understand how the parents feel. So anything with your car company that you could track your car, and God forbid, if someone was carjacking, you had a child in the car, I mean, you definitely want to scream to that carjacker, there's a baby in the car, there's a baby in the car. They're not going to want that car, for sure. And we haven't had a child harmed yet.
Yes. And I think that as we have, I think some of us are frustrated. I'm frustrated on the call. What do you think is the prognosis for, let me just ask this question of you, Chief. This is a very thorny issue. The cases present issues of being able to identify the defendant. I mean, that's a really tough issue in any crime. There's issues with regard to speed of offenses. There's issues regarding whether some of the people committing these offenses even understand like what the heck they're doing with a gun. So I guess my question is, what's our prognosis? I think there are some people who are asking questions on this call are basically like, it doesn't sound like there's anything that we can do. So can you help us understand where you think that we're going to be going in the next few months? Sure.
So you're right. So the hurdles, there's many hurdles as far as the investigation is concerned, but we're treating the carjackings now in the detective division like shootings and murders. And to Chief Ahmad's point, we're using social media to help solve the crime. So for example, when we get a carjacking offender, we're dumping those phones if they have a phone on them, and we're getting into those phones. Hence, if they were posting up like, that they did 5 carjackings, then we're slowing it down, working with the state's attorney's office, and going to be able to solve those cases. But obviously that's already after the carjacking occurred. Your question is like, where is this heading? There's a few things going on now. Obviously the vaccines are out, and I know that I don't want to really dip my toe into the schools, because I know the mayor's dealing with CTU every day on opening up the schools. But I think where we're trending is, as people receive the vaccine, as we start to go back to normal, as the schools begin to open, and as we continue to build better investigations, the goal is, as we precisely focus on this, and as Chief Ahmad and Chief Tyler stated, we're talking almost all the time now. We're on calls with you guys, but obviously off calls. My sergeants are working with their state's attorneys. And I think and even the feds, we just charged another federal case today. So I think where we're going is as we get the vaccine, as the schools continue to open, and as we open up, and as we do a better job of prosecuting cases, this is how we're hoping to curb this and bring this back down to, and I hate to say normal levels because that's not acceptable, but to levels that at least have been occurring within the last 5 years.
Alderman
Okay.
Smith, may I also respond to your question, just a different
Sure.
response? I mentioned at the beginning that in addition to supervising the juvenile justice or the criminal prosecutions, I also supervise the child protection prosecutions. I am suggesting that our approach be multifaceted, that we focus on solving the violent crime, but we cannot lose sight of the fact that children who are often committing these crimes are from under-resourced areas of our city, areas that need educational resources, child education, trauma services, mental health intervention. We know this. And we have to work on that issue and commit to putting resources back into community. Because in my experience, and I've been a criminal attorney for over 15 years, it's my experience that folks who commit crimes, kids, compared to the kids who don't, the children who come from neighborhoods that have resources and job opportunities and educational and healthcare are not out there committing aggravated vehicular hijackings. And so we all have to commit to resourcing these areas so that we're not here in 12 years having a worse kind of conversation about the same kind of crimes.
Yes, and certainly amen to that. In fact, we've had a couple questions here about what can we do to put resources in communities? What are we going to do? And in no way do we want to ignore that. It's just not the entire, today is the focus of this particular event. For those of you who may not know, City Council has been doing a lot of work to relook at our juvenile justice system and our juvenile intervention system. I think Chief Deenihan talked about that there are youth intervention organizations that he's involved with. Did you want to mention any more about that, Chief Deenihan?
No, just that, like Chief Ahmad said, so we do our own diversion program at the Juvenile Justice Center. So when individuals get arrested for PSMV or in stolen cars, we have classes on Saturdays. And if they go through the program, then it goes off their record. And to the chief's point, usually these people don't reoffend. So it's about getting them the services that they deserve. So yeah, I think everybody's heard the term, you can't arrest your way out of the situation. So that's not, and that's not what the police are trying to do. It's just that obviously our focus is to prevent crime and violence. And that is the one tool that the police departments do have. But to Chief Ahmad's point, and this is usually kind of coming from City Hall, and I know people said, where's the mayor on this? We talk to the mayor weekly. The mayor's very well aware of the carjacking problems. She's extremely concerned about it. And she's trying to put every single resource that she has at it. The police are just one resource that have a specific focus. But to Chief Ahmad's point, it's about the resources in the communities and specifically the schools. And I think, I don't want to speak for the schools, but I know the schools, when they are open, then they have additional, like a remarkable amount of resources that they can put towards the kids that are affected by this. And the principals and the teachers, they know exactly which kids that they need to put in. And there's all kinds of programs. I know there's a Choose to Change program that's been extremely effective with the Chicago public school system. And there's several other long-term programs. And even, I know there's always been a topic on the school resource officers, but there's programs that when the kids sit down with some of the school resource officers, not one time, but for like a long period of time and actually build relationships, that it changes people's behavior. So there are, I'm not extremely well versed on all of the resources, Alderwoman, but I do know through City Hall that there are many resources that are used to help the juveniles. And to Chief Ahmad's point, the certain communities need even more assistance with those resources. I just know that the schools are a huge resource when they're open.
And Chief, to piggyback on that, at the district level, we're conducting what is called custom notifications. And what we're doing is we, not only the police department, we're working with our partners, our community partners, our all the resources we have in the districts. And we're actually reaching out to individuals who are victims of crimes, are actual offenders of crimes, and we're giving them options. We're giving them resources. We're trying to help to get them out of that life, or try to give them options to have the ability to get a job somewhere, to get assistance where they would normally not get, right? And we just did a couple today here in the 19th district, and seemed successful. Family was on board and everybody was talking. So hopefully we get the feedback to move forward and help some of these individuals that could otherwise be committing some of the crimes we're talking about.
Thanks, Commander. And to follow up on that, Alderman, I think what people understand is what he's talking about, these custom notifications. It's not the police knocking at your door and 10 police officers. We're part of it, but the commander shows up with a large group support system, and it's the support system that actually does all the work and says, we are here for you. Can we get the child a job? Can we get them specific resources? The police are just part of it. So it's not the police knocking on your door with there's 10 police officers, just a police presence. It's more of, here's all the resources and the police are part of it. And if, please accept these resources to change the juvenile's behavior, because to Chief Ahmad's point, that's the goal. The goal is to change behavior for every kid, no matter if it's one crime or 5 crimes. The goal is to change the behavior. So in 12 years, to the Chief's point, we're not here again.
Yes. So let me just do a lightning round, a little bit of questions, or maybe even things that perhaps suggestions made by our participants that I'd like to share with the panelists, and perhaps a couple questions that might require some giving us some information going forward. First of all, with regard to how we should behave, I just want to sum that up for everyone, which is the police are advising that when you are in a carjacking, you should not fight. You should give up your keys and get out of, get away from the situation. That's number one, to be very clear, because there's been a couple, are you saying we should or we shouldn't? If the cars today, unfortunately, require that fob to start it, that we should give it up. As you heard, most of these cars are being recovered. So give up your car, and it is your car as opposed to your life. That was something, if you lock your door and yet you're being held up, you should do the safe thing and give up the car. I'm hearing nods. Okay. Then a couple other suggestions, which is on the very interesting issue of people out on bond, big suggestions for why don't we put this whole system, instead of waiting for physical paperwork, put it online so that there's faster communication between the court system, the sheriff system, and the Cook County State's Attorney. A lot of concern on the call, and I share this, about mandatory minimums for gun possession. I admit I am in favor of that. I am a fierce anti-gun advocate. And personally, I've spent a bunch of my time in my past trying to shut down stores where they sell guns illegally. And I don't understand why we can shut down the gun shop, because we have, but then when someone uses one of those guns, somehow they don't have to go to jail for it. So that is how I feel. I know that it's my opinion, and it may not be the opinion of everyone on the call, but I do believe that guns, to save lives, I'd rather send some people to jail, I guess. That's how I feel. Also, there's a lot of talk on this call from our members that we wish schools would get back, high schools, and this is upper grades, high schools and middle schools get reopened so that some of these people who are in the car or maybe committing the crime are in a much more supportive environment of their schools. There have been a couple questions about Uber and Lyft drivers, and I wonder if there's any information you can share about what Uber and Lyft is doing to try to keep their drivers safe, since so many Uber and Lyft drivers have been carjacked, that would be really helpful.
Sure. Can I tackle that one real quick, Alderman?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so we're in contact with them, our hijacking task force, and we are working with them on how to keep their drivers safe. One of the things we're doing, and for people on the call, would keep the drivers safe and would keep the passengers safe as well. And once again, I think it requires a little bit of patience. But if you live close to a police station, we're having Uber drivers pick up people and drop people off in front of police stations. And that way they feel safe, especially if they're sitting in their car waiting for 7 minutes sometimes for people to come out. We're also working with Uber and Lyft. Obviously, we can't control what they do or how they, externally, but asking them, it would be great if they would support their cars with some sort of GPS device or some sort of cameras to assist their drivers in shutting down the cars or locating them and then apprehending the offenders. But I mean, that's up to Uber and Lyft, but we are making those suggestions.
Yeah. So I'm just whipping through a lot of the questions.
Let me interrupt for a second on Uber drivers, since I have a restaurant with a lot of Uber deliveries. They leave their car on while they quickly try to pick up a food order. And that has happened more than once, where the car is missing while they leave the car operating, trying to quickly get in and get out of their restaurant purchase, for the delivery. So that's anecdotal, but I know that's an issue with Uber, DoorDash, and the rest of them. So,
yeah. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Alderman Tunney. A lot of support on our call for trying to get more help down in communities in which young people seem to think it's okay to go and do this, to try to get them on the right path. Everyone does support this, I will say, and to invest in underserved community, which is certainly a priority of our administration. And at the same time, we know that it's the job of the state's attorneys to protect the victims' rights. And I know that's something that Chief Toller has explained to us. So with that, I'd like to offer Alderman Tunney the opportunity to give any other closing remarks that you'd like to make.
Alderwoman, I was ready to go about 20 minutes ago. But I want to thank everyone on the call, and especially our constituents. We started this call as a team effort. There, in a lot of this, as you said, Michelle, is we got to work with our legislators too down in Springfield. This is, some of the people on the call cannot. These are bigger issues than we are individually, and I think it's incumbent that there's got to be some work in Springfield also. And the pendulum has moved to the left, and we'll see where it ends. But we've got to be in close contact with our state senators and our state reps. So with that, I want to wish everyone a happy and safe evening, and thank everyone on the call for their input and their constructive advice and criticism, for that matter. Thank you.
Well, and yes, and I'd like to thank Alderman Tunney and our two commanders, Chief Deenihan, and our two chiefs from the state's attorney's office, for really giving us the information that we need to be able to properly advocate for changes if we think that they're needed. I agree that there are probably perhaps some more legislative changes that we could get, and we'll be giving you some information about that in the next coming weeks or so. At the same time, I think that in this moment of peril, if we're all more careful and work to help our police, that is what we can do. I'm going to repeat again that court advocacy has been very effective in our area. And that if you'd like to join court advocacy, we've even had court advocacy hearings on Zoom as well in this. So if you'd like to join court advocacy, you can email my office at yourvoice@ward43.org, or Tom's email.
44thward.org. 44thward.org. And
44thward.org, that you can get involved there. I think that this is a tough problem, but working with our partners, I am quite confident that we will overcome this and things will get better. So with that, thank you all very much for coming. We really appreciate all the frank conversation that we've had, And I'm sure that we will follow up in the coming weeks and months. Thank you for coming and good evening, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.